everyone, I'm Michaela Kathleen, and in this video I'm doing my October reading wrap-up. I read lots of books in October, so just jumping right in. First, I read Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. This one was kind of everywhere in 2020, so I knew of it and was intrigued, and then Jodi Picoult came out with a book and I went to the release event with my mom, and it was also a Shakespeare book, and so I decided on a whim to get Hamlet and kind of read them as a pair back to back. And I will say I definitely liked By Any Other Name by Jodi Picoult much better, but Hamnet was interesting. It had very lyrical writing style. It was, hello Bo, can I have my coffee and not have you touch it? Thank you. You can sit with me, or you can look out the window. There you go. Bo has joined us. Where was I? Lyrical writing style. It was a bit slow. This is a much smaller book than By Any Other Name, and not a whole lot happens in it. It's very much just like a character study, a family study, very internal. It bounces around in the timeline quite a bit. It is about Shakespeare's wife. Shakespeare's not mentioned by name in this book, and so I thought he was going to be a really small character and not appear very much, but he is actually in the book quite a bit. He's just never named. So the book is focusing more on his wife and her feelings throughout their relationship and marriage, and during the loss of their son and the after effects of that. In this book, their son Hamnet dies of the plague. In reality, we are not sure what he died of. But yeah, so I did find it interesting. But part of that was because I think I was on a very big, like, 1600s medieval Europe Shakespeare kick. I don't know if I would have been as interested if I wasn't so strongly, like, in that zone anyways because of By Any Other Name and the fact that I was rewatching the show Will on TNT. And that I had read just a whole bunch and watched a whole bunch of like 1600s content this year. I do think the book was maybe a little bit overly kind to Shakespeare and his character, but that is neither here nor there. After that, I finished Scattered Showers by Rainbow Rowell. I have been working on this one for the last few months, ever since Slowdance came out. I don't typically enjoy short story collections, and I think part of that is because it's just bouncing so quickly from story to story, and I don't know, I like more time with my stories, and bouncing so quickly from one to the next just isn't my vibe, I guess. So I had the idea that I would try just reading one short story between each book I read until I finished the collection. And I do think that helped a little bit. I would say this is my favorite short story collection I've ever read. I think that's partly my method, but partly it's just Rainbow. But even though it is my favorite short story collection that I've read, I still, after like adding up my ratings for each individual story, figured the average to be like 3.5 stars anyways. So still just not exactly my cup of tea. Some of these were real hits, some were real misses. Usually with short story collections, there aren't a lot of hits for me. So that was kind of the difference for this one. But while I did rate 2 or 3 of the stories at 5 stars, there were 2 or 3 that I rated at 1 star. So my 5 stars were Kindred Spirits and Mixed Messages. I really liked Mixed Messages because it was really funny and it was featuring 2 characters from Attachments, which in my opinion is Rainbow Rowell's funniest book. And it was just these 2 characters being their same old funny selves that they were in the book. And then Kindred Spirits was a story featuring new characters, not from any of Rainbow's previous books. And this one was people lined up to go to a new, I think, Star Wars movie or something Star Wars adjacent. And so yeah, that one was just, it was funny. It had all the fandom vibes. I really enjoyed that one. And then my 2 1 stars were If the Fates Allow and The Prince and the Troll. If the Fates Allow was a real disappointment because that one was using a character from Fangirl, which is my favorite Rainbow Rowell book, but in this story she was just insufferable and boring. It was Reagan, our main character's roommate from Fangirl. And yeah, that story just had nothing to it. It wasn't funny, there was nothing exciting about it. I don't feel like we learned much more about Reagan than we already knew. Just a real disappointment all around. And then The Prince and the Troll to me was just a really weird one. It was kind of like a troll under the bridge situation, but it was a romance, so it was like fairy tale-esque, but it was also in the modern day because there was cell phones and Starbucks, and that can work, but just the way that Rainbow put them together for me did not. But yeah, those are kind of the highlights, the best and the worst in the collection for me personally. And yeah, this one was enjoyable, more enjoyable than the average short story collection for me, but still not the thing I'm gonna reach for first. There were also like a lot of holiday stories in here, lots of Christmases and New Year's. And there was one that takes place on Christmas Eve, so I think I'm gonna reread that one on Christmas Eve this year, just for the fun. After that, I read Pumpkinheads by Rainbow Rowell, just having a real Rainbow Rowell year this year. And I'm also not a big graphic novel person, but I loved this one fully. Not like just my favorite one that I read, but still just okay. I just really loved it. 5 stars for sure. Will be rereading it next year on actual Halloween. This year I did not read it on Halloween. I read it just before going to the pumpkin patch where the graphic novel takes place, although, you know, Rainbow changed details to make it not literal. But that was my childhood pumpkin patch, the pumpkin patch that this one is based on, and I had not been in probably almost a decade. So I was very excited to finally be reading this one the same year that I was going back. I had been wanting to read this one, but as I said, graphic novels aren't my thing, and so I just had not gotten around to it. And yeah, I'm glad I finally did. The artwork was very cute, the story was very cute. Not a ton happens in it. It's pretty low stakes, but it's just fun and enjoyable and funny and cute and cozy and perfect for a light fall read. Because it is so fluffy and light and the stakes are pretty low, it's also very predictable. Like, it's very obvious from the very beginning how it's going to end, but I was totally okay with that. Sometimes when you're reading something light, you just want the story to be what it's supposed to be, and that was definitely the case with this one. In this one, our 2 main characters have worked at this pumpkin patch every year throughout high school, and they're kind of pumpkin patch pals. They always hang out as co-workers at this pumpkin patch, but they don't see each other any other time of year. And it's their final year at the patch, and they're very sad about the fact that they're not going to see each other anymore. But spoiler alert, they realize they should just see each other outside of the patch. But at the end, they kind of mention, like, half jokingly that they could be like Santa's helpers at the mall or something together. And now I really want like a Santa's Helpers sequel for this graphic novel so badly. It would be the perfect fall and winter pairing, in my opinion. After that, I read The Body by Stephen King. The movie Stand By Me was based on this book, and I watched that all throughout childhood, but I had never read the book. But it was just randomly at a Barnes & Noble Starbucks on the counter, like, buy a drink, get this book for $5 situation. And so I picked it up earlier this year and planned to read it in October. And I enjoyed it quite a bit. I rated it 4 stars. It's a very good coming of age tale. It's quite similar to the movie. I would say the ending is slightly different and a little bit better in the book. Sadder, but better. But other than that, the movie is pretty faithful, and this is one where, like, if you watch the movie, you don't, I think, need to read the book, unlike some where, like, there's a lot missing and you really should read the book. If you are, like, a Stephen King fan in general, on not even a super high level, because I'm not a, like, super fan, but if you're at least even a little bit of a fan, you will notice Easter eggs throughout the book, which is fun. And yeah, overall, a good read. Glad to have finally read it. And it did kick off just a little bit of a mini train, because after that, me and my husband read together Stephen King's first book, Carrie, which I had only seen the Chloe Grace Moretz version of Carrie and had very little memory of it. Like, I somehow erased the entire ending of that movie from my mind. And in this case, I will say the book is much better than both of the movie versions. We watched the 70s version, me for the first time, my husband for the second time, and then the Chloe Grace Moretz version, me for the second time, my husband for the first time. And the book is better than both versions of the movie, and I'm sure better than the early 2000s version, which I think is the worst movie version, but neither of us have seen that one. This one, for anyone who doesn't know, is about a girl with an extremely strict religious mother who is horribly bullied at school, and when she's a senior, she develops these telekinetic powers and uses them to wreak havoc. So the themes of this one were really interesting. I was kind of surprised by how many good characters they were. I kind of thought that everyone in Carrie, other than Carrie, depending on how you want to look at that, was just totally evil assholes. So I was kind of pleasantly surprised by how good, like, the principal, for example, was. I don't know if that was really very realistic, unfortunately. But yes, just another interesting exploration of youth, I would say, similar to The Body, but slightly older. There were definitely some questionable bits in both books. I don't know if you can make it through a Stephen King book without having bits that you're like, did that really need to be there? And definitely overall, he's kind of a hit and miss author for me. He's one where I think actually a lot of times the movie adaptations are as good or better, but it was definitely an interesting read. He's definitely an author that I like kind of briefly visiting every few years. And then finally in October, I read The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. Originally, I was planning to reread Ninth House and read the sequel Hellbent this October. I read Ninth House last October, but first of all, I read a lot in October. Some things that I kind of added on randomly, like Carrie, for example. And so I felt like I wasn't gonna have time for both in October. And then also, Ninth House was a little bit of a struggle to get through last year. It ended in a place that made me want to read the sequel, but I definitely wasn't like super duper excited about rereading Ninth House. But I knew like I need to refresh my memory before I can read the sequel. So I decided to swap out Ninth House and Hellbent for her new book, The Familiar, and then I'm gonna do my Ninth House in October reread next year and read Hellbent, just to put a little more space between the first read of Ninth House and the reread. And I think I'm glad I made that decision. I enjoyed The Familiar quite a bit. It was very interesting. It was smaller and quicker to get through than Ninth House. It took me back to the 1600s yet again, which was fun, but in a very different way and place than I had been for much of last month. This one takes place in the 1600s in Spain, and our main character has some magical abilities. She is secretly Jewish, she is very poor and a maid, and so she's kind of struggling to keep her identities hidden so as not to attract the attention of the Spanish Inquisition. But then suddenly her magical abilities are discovered, and kind of people in power kind of use her for power plays and is trying to have her win this competition to become like the king's magician, sort of. And she gets the help of a familiar along the way. So going into this one, I did not know really anything about it except the cover and the title. So I thought this was going to be a vampire book. It is not. Obviously, familiars can be connected to things other than just vampires, but that's where my mind goes. But this one had a really strong beginning that hooked me right away with just the complex characters, the complex setting, the political intrigue that was going on. It again just had like very interesting, well developed and explored themes. Once they got into like the competition part, it did slow down a bit for me, and that part actually kind of reminded me a little bit of the sequel to A Darker Shade of Magic, because it was again like a magical competition situation. But it definitely still had all the good stuff. The characters were still great vibes, all that. I do think the ending was a little bit too quick and a little bit too easy, and I don't know, just not quite explained enough. It just seemed very convenient, the ending. But yeah, overall very good. I rated it 4 stars, knocked it down a star just for the little bit of slowness in the middle and the way the ending wrapped up. But overall, very good. The writing was just pretty impressive and spectacular. And yeah, just always have fun continuing on my Leigh Bardugo journey. So that was it for all of the mini books that I read in October. I'm really happy with all the spooky and fall vibes that I was able to fit in for my reading for this month. Let me know down below if you read anything like fall vibed or spooky vibes. I hope you enjoyed watching. Remember, words matter.